Well, good evening, one. Good evening, all. Welcome to the show. Hello, Anna. Dr. Anna, how are you, mate?
I'm not bad. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty well. Bit of a different show tonight, a bit of a different thing overall this week. We've been running at 10 p.m. at night, but tonight we're also doing a bit of a different thing even for the week. Even though there's lots of news going around at the moment, for people who know this product, we often talk news of the day. We have news conversations. But tonight, Anna, after we spoke to you last week, 7 days ago today, and we just talked for the whole hour, I thought, and there was people asking questions, I thought, why don't we just jump back on, do a late evening one? You told me you're a bit of a night owl.
Yeah.
Give people the opportunity to ask their COVID questions, have a bit of a chat ourselves about some of the stuff that is in the news, specifically around COVID, and do sort of it sounds a bit depressing, like a COVID special. Normally specials are kind of something fun, like, it's the World Cup special or whatever. This is the COVID special. I'm not quite,
Yeah.
but anyway, it could be good information and stuff. And maybe before we start, there will be people either seeing this live or watching it on demand afterwards who may not know exactly everything about yourself. So why don't you just tell us a bit about why we're talking to you about COVID, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I'm an immunologist at Auckland University, and I'm running a long COVID study. So I've been immersed in the COVID scene ever since it wasn't a thing in New Zealand. That whole phase of is it coming? So I've got a deep-seated interest in understanding what this virus is doing to us, and therefore at this time. This time in the pandemic, when everyone's getting back to normal, we're still trying to raise the alarm of it's not cool to get infected, or at least try not to. Yeah.
Yep. Mate, I'm down. I'm down for trying not to get infected. I'm having conversations on the daily with friends and family that are just like, oh, I'm just over this. Maybe we'll just get it. And I say to them, but hang on. And this is something that we talked about last Friday, which I think is important to talk about tonight. You being the expert, me just being the patsy in the background, is the reinfection status. And I'm getting messages from people when we do these shows about they caught COVID and they caught it again 6 weeks later. So for people who are saying, or people who say to me, oh, I might just get reinfected, I might just get it and get it done with. It's like, well, you get it now. What about in 6 weeks from now when potentially you could get it again? Are you just going to get it again? Or are you going to go into isolation then? And what about 6 weeks after that? And what about 6 weeks after that? Wouldn't it make more sense just to, if you can, try and avoid it? If you can. It's not possible for everyone, but if you can. So, and it's getting harder and harder, I guess.
Yeah. And so, it's human nature though, right? Like we all are over this. And it's almost human nature also to think, oh, my mates who have had this, they've got that sort of, they can be a little bit more relaxed for a while. Oh, we've got a visitor here. That's just standard human nature, I think. But at the end of the day, come on, Kat. At the end of the day, yes, reinfections are not going to be a good idea. So every time this virus enters your body and you have to fight it off, each time that happens, it's impacting your immunity. So, and we're already hearing about, it's here. It's seeming apocalyptic already, right? We've got monkeypox hitting the scene. We've got flu's already here. We know that RSV is often a problem during winter. So adding that in, oh my goodness, seriously.
Your hand, yeah. Where she's read up for her close up, Mr. DeVille. She's good.
Yeah, jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah. So reinfection. So I get it. We are all over COVID, and that whole idea that get it over with, that's just completely false. Because there is no long-standing immunity from getting the virus. So all that's doing is giving you, guess what, a predisposition to getting worse and worse and worse each time. So it's kind of like if you've had COVID, it puts you at a new risk level. Do you know, like that becomes, some people call it an underlying condition that you've had COVID. So no, you know, please don't, you know, let that complacency creep in and say, oh, let's just get it over with. Because we get it. We all get that that's human nature, that we want to move on, but it's not safe to do that. And it's not going to protect you. And we already know that the variants that are here with us now, you know, that are coming in, probably brewing away in New Zealand as well, you know, each one of those escapes our immunity.
Yeah.
You know, like as in,
also,
you know, each new one.
Also seeing news this week. And look, just if you're joining in, the reason we're doing this, one of the reasons is to give you guys a chance to ask questions. If you want to ask Anna, the ways you can do it is, especially if you're watching on YouTube, just in the comments, ask your question. The other thing though is if you're on Twitter, like you can already see some people here are doing, then just hashtag Ask Dr. Anna. If you hashtag Ask Dr. Anna, then we will start putting some of these questions to Anna straight away. I do have some other stuff that I wouldn't mind talking about, but to be honest with you, Anna, if we fill up this time with people just asking questions, I'll just sit back and read questions and do nothing else. I'm completely happy to do that because a bunch of the conversations we have had before and we will continue to have. But what I was going to say to you about the not getting infected is, well, you know what I mean, trying not getting it done on purpose, is those terrifying numbers I saw this week where it talks about 10% of people who have got an Omicron are potentially going to then have long COVID, 200,000 New Zealanders potentially with long COVID. And we don't know what that means yet because we haven't had long enough to know what long COVID might mean.
Exactly. So, you know, for a while, when Omicron hit New Zealand, we were saying we don't know. So now's not the time to, you know, test it out. And as more and more data was coming through, you know, we always look to the UK because they have a wonderful self-reporting system over there. The ONS is tracking, you know, statistics there, because many countries aren't. You know, many countries aren't acknowledging the post-infectious period, the long COVID syndrome, essentially. So we've been waiting. And what we were seeing, you know, so Omicron hit in late November. It hit South Africa, swept through, but very fast behind Delta, and then it hit the UK. And soon thereafter, you know, that was traveling around the world, obviously. But then when BA.2 came in, we were kind of at the point where BA.2 kicked in here and sort of took over much quicker than the point one, if you like. And so, you know, we were waiting for statistics based on, you know, those variants or those variants or subvariants of Omicron. And so just recently, yes, that the new updated statistics that were coming out of the UK said from BA.2, it's hovering around 10% still getting long COVID. So we absolutely knew that long COVID was happening, you know, sort of a good few months in from Omicron hitting the UK, because the way that we learn this is that the support groups suddenly fill up, you know, the demand for the support groups. And what we've seen here, obviously, because Omicron has been our hardest hitting variant, you know, obviously, and our support group has exploded, you know, like it's doubled in number.
Wow.
You know, we're approaching 600-700 or something like that. And I mean, support groups are selective, right? It's people who like to join Facebook and Facebook groups, and it's not for everyone, and it's not going to capture everyone. But we certainly saw this explosion. And what we also saw with Omicron, especially with us here in New Zealand, because we've had such controlled outbreaks, is that the sort of the severity of the lingering symptoms seem to be quite specific, you know, like as in there was like, I really, you know, that the fatigue was extreme or the shortness of breath, all of those things seemed to be coming through quite quickly. Whereas what we learned from long COVID from other variants is that you may have hardly felt a thing with your infection, back to normal, and then boom, it hits you 1 month later. So, you know, so it's constantly a moving beast, if you like, and especially because Omicron changed. And, you know, regrettably, that word mild that hit internationally damaged everything. It really, really damaged everything. So that was a news headline that sort of hit this week. And the reason why it's sort of news this week is that this is around about the 12 weeks since our sort of real centralized peak. when we were
Right.
getting 20,000 cases a day. So what we're sort of raising the alarm again is we know our healthcare system's swamped, right? Like we're heading into our winter, and we know that healthcare is under strain at the best of times. And now we're going to have a lot of people who are needing to seek medical assistance all at the same time. We knew this was always going to happen, and there was no real preparation for that. So it's not about sort of, and we don't want to dump on healthcare workers either, but it's that realization that is coming, and what on earth are we going to do with that? So the more that we can get that message out there to keep protecting, the less cases, the less of us that are going to be needing healthcare to assist us through these horrible, debilitating symptoms out the other side. Yeah.
Okay, look, I was going to keep talking about that, but we've got people who are asking questions and want to get involved, so
Yeah.
we'll do that. I'll just finish by saying about the long COVID. I read an article the other day that said there are some, worldwide health experts who are saying their big concern is the next worldwide public health epidemic concern will be the long COVID. Will be 10% of the world's population potentially with long COVID, which will then, it's not a new disease, but the effects and impacts from it. So, it's terrifying.
We've been raising this alarm for like a year. It's just that no one was listening here. Like we knew that this was going to happen. And some say the alarm's been raised for 2 years, but it's been a good year of trying to get the ball rolling to say, come on, let's prepare for this. So absolutely, this is going to be an economic impact, family impact, everything. Yeah.
That thing you said about the kind of misinformation out there, it's missed because it wasn't necessarily on purpose about coronavirus being mild or milder.
Yeah.
I got a shock when I saw an epidemiologist say, Omicron's not mild. It's mild because we've got the vaccine, so it makes it mild. But on that point, I've got two questions for you to start with. These are quite recent questions. There's people who have been in before this, but it's relative to what we're talking about. Just simply, Kim wants to know what is long COVID, which I think let's lay that out there. But also, Opcraft says as well, what is the rate of long COVID in children? So there's a couple of specific questions about long COVID. If you want to go for those, go for it.
Yeah. So what is long COVID? Essentially, it's an umbrella term that is being given to the wide spectrum of symptoms that can occur once your infectious period has passed. So, you're over the acute stuff, the sniffles and, what feels like for some people quite mild, some people it's really rough. But essentially that non-infectious period, you enter the post-acute phase. And again, this is another actual Omicron problem, is that pre-Omicron, we were dealing, with Delta before. So that's where the World Health Organization gave a definition that to define yourself as being someone with long COVID, you have to be experiencing symptoms for 12 weeks. That may get reassessed based on Omicron. We don't really know. We're not judging anyone to say you don't have long COVID, because we absolutely want people to seek support. But I'll cover off some of the key symptoms with what's going on with long COVID, because it's also important. Some people are brushing off some of these things. Like I literally hear people say, oh, it's pretty mild for me. I'm fine, blah, 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 blah. But you know what? Oh my God, I can't remember people's names anymore. I still struggle, with thinking. So the top ones are neurological dysfunction, which can cover off things like I've just said, inability to remember things, just high functioning power. Like you just can't do the things that you normally did. You can't think as fast. You can't remember stuff. Some
people talk about being cloudy. I'm a bit cloudy.
Yep.
That's the phrase that I hear people using.
Yeah. So, I mean, so the sort of casual term is brain fog, but that just sounds so mild, right? Like brain fog just sounds, I'm a bit foggy. But it's really, really impacting neurological function. So, people recognize this. You might have a job that requires you to write a lot, write or whatever. There's so many jobs and everything you do in your daily life that impacts your brain function. So some people say things like, oh my goodness, I just read an article I wrote. I don't remember writing it. And it's jumbled.
Wow.
So there's so many impacts on neurological function. And that's really key. I had someone saying to me, it took me 7 weeks to get over it. I'm good now. But oh my goodness, I'd be on my way to work, sitting at the traffic lights, and I'd wonder where I was going. So this is happening. We've had 1 million or 2 million, as people are predicting, people with COVID. How many of us are having even the mildest form of repercussions from this infection, where you're sitting at the traffic light and you don't know where you're going? So that's even in the mildest, perspective, that you might just, you're still foggy for a long time. But the definition of long COVID is it becomes it's extremely debilitating. So the neurological symptoms are key, and then the fatigue. And again, fatigue's a horrible, meaningless type word as well, because fatigue in this situation means absolutely bone numbing incapacitation. It's not tiredness. You can't just sleep it off. This fatigue with this condition is absolutely bone crushing, is how it can be described. And alongside that is the medical term is post-exertional malaise, or post-exertional exacerbation of your symptoms, which means any form of exertion. Could be using your brain, it could be working, or it can be emotion, or it could be going for a walk, and the recovery phase thereafter puts you in bed for days or weeks, or it could trigger a severe episode that you don't get out of bed again. It is so severe for some people, and that's the thing. So those are the sort of top categories of symptoms of where it's really affecting your brain, and it's really affecting your ability to function in your normal life. So the fatigue side, and then the slew of symptoms is just so broad thereafter, from tinnitus to eye issues, you name it. Like, every support group is full of someone saying, has anybody experienced XYZ? And then everyone answers with, oh my goodness, me too. Wow. And that's the thing. It's a full body dysfunction. And one of the areas of research that we're not, that we're sort of uncovering with all this, is that we know that it's affecting our blood vessels. So the virus is damaging our blood vessels, which is where all our blood flows, everything circulates around. And so when that's damaged, blood doesn't flow around as well anymore. We've got inflammation everywhere. And so that's why we sort of also raising that alarm that when you do get infected, don't panic about this or anything, but just rest, go through your recovery phase, and don't try and rush it up, because we can't speed up the recovery phase. So that's kind of covering off the core elements of what sort of defines long COVID. But on an official scale, it's generally speaking at 12 weeks. And that's why it came out this week. What's our infection rate been, and what are we looking at for healthcare problems? And 10% is still a huge number. Even 1% is a huge number. Yeah. So, this is not rare. So, and then the question about, how does this impact children?
Yeah.
The problem, there's been massive problems internationally about, the rate of long COVID in children for numerous reasons. That when the first variants were hitting, yes, one of the positive sign was that, yes, this is a pandemic, it's horrible, but at least it's sparing our children, was kind of one of the vibes. And, and again, that was still generalizing. There were still children that can be impacted from the very first variants, but it was on a lesser scale. Absolutely. But we can't ever minimize that children should not get sick. Hospitalizing a child is always a big deal, right? So even though, the virus has impacted children less, it is still a huge deal. But as we hit Omicron, there was a lot of minimization happening in various areas of the world, sort of saying, look, children are fine, that they're not going to be impacted. But we still say, we do still say they absolutely are less impacted than adults, that the numbers do say that. But as Omicron hit, we were seeing higher hospitalization rates, and just sort of more children getting symptoms and things like that. So the short answer is how many children are impacted by long COVID is we don't really have a good handle on the numbers, because I think the true incidences, and especially for us in New Zealand with Omicron, is that we won't really understand that, and because it's too new. We did know that prior to Omicron it was a low number, but because there are so many complications for children, testing, we weren't generally swabbing children with PCRing if you didn't have to and all the rest of it. So the studies, despite there being studies in high impact journals, there are massive flaws with a lot of the research because of even immunologically. Not all children will mount an immune response we can detect and all these sorts of things. So it's really, really messy, but we just want to protect children as much as possible because we feel it's not fair to, to risk, impose the risks. So just do what we can to protect children as much as possible because we are seeing long COVID in children here in New Zealand. It is happening, but we just know that it's going to be rarer than it is in adults. And, that's what's always been the case, but it's not zero. It's not zero risk.
You were talking then about, and don't worry, all the questions that are coming in, I'm not taking up your time, just chill. You were just talking about all the different symptoms that can come through long COVID and stuff. I've read there was an article, I think, on One News the other night about a woman who, after 2 years, still doesn't have her taste and smell back. I've read about people, even with mild cases of Omicron, suffering enough damage to their brain as they would expect over a 10-year aging period. And I think, bless us, this one came out this week as well, and I wonder if this is to do with affecting the blood flow and bloodstream, heart, wrist disease, sores after COVID, even with a mild case. So not really needing to get into that as a conversation now, but just to demonstrate to people, I guess, with some information backing up kind of what you were saying. I mean, do you want to speak to that before we go into a question?
Well, just to sort of skim over that in the sense that, yes, we already are seeing some of these long-term impacts coming through in studies. Yep. We know that there's impacts on the brain. We know that there's impacts on cardiac risk, this one here. And another story we did, I think it was a week ago, the other aspect that's coming through is that if some of these symptoms or some of them severe, like this patient down in Wellington that was on One News, the story we did, she's got severe nerve damage and her doctors are not recognizing it as an effect from the virus.
Wow.
And it is just Google it, like seriously. So these are other aspects that are coming through that because our medical, our doctors are learning as we go, if they're not keeping up with what's coming out, this type of thing's happening. So, she's severely impacted. She's got nerve damage. She tells her story as being completely healthy, fit, running every day, and boom, got kicked by Omicron. Day 5, she started having all this nerve damage, inability to walk properly. And she's screaming out to be recognized that this was because of the virus.
Yeah.
And her doctor said, no, I think it's stress.
Wow.
Yep.
Wow.
And so you think these cases are isolated, and then you realize they're not.
Yeah.
So there's a tendency for some of these, what appears to be left field symptoms, as getting reported back to patients as stress-induced. And it's just not right. We know that this is very biological. So SARS-CoV-2 is a virus that's hitting the world all at the same time. So we get a lot of cases. We know that other viruses do this. So where we're heading with some of the research is the viruses we live, as I call them, onboard viruses, glandular fever. And guess what? Glandular fever is still out there. So if you've got teenage kids that suddenly get a virus, real sick, throat, don't automatically rule, when you rule out COVID, there's also EBV, which causes glandular fever. We can't lose sight of all the viruses that are among us already, right? And so, and that's why that one's called the kissing disease or whatever, because that's how it spreads around in your teens. So, and that's known to cause so many cancers, MS, ME, you name it. So that virus is an issue, and we live with they hang out in our bodies. We hang out with EBV. There's a whole list of them. Shingles is the reactivation of chickenpox. So where we're sort of heading with some of this research is that perhaps when we keep bombarding ourselves with SARS-CoV-2 with reinfections, that our body's just going, hang on, hey, I'm done. I can't keep everything under control, because that's what our immune system does. Our immune system keeps the viruses that are hitchhiking, coming on board for life, under control.
Yeah.
So we haven't had to test this with a virus that's kicking our butts so badly. So that's what we sort of think is at play. And so there's the spectrum of symptoms that are completely debilitating. So the nerve damage is absolutely prevalent. My inbox is full of it all the time. So nerve damage, cardiac. So racing heart, it doesn't necessarily mean there's something wrong with your heart. Your nervous system's disrupted. So this virus, when it affects you, disrupts your nervous system, which can affect you can get shortness of breath and heart racing, and those things are what we call medically as dysautonomia. It means your autonomic system, your autopilot, has been annihilated by this virus, and so that's why all those things don't know how to work properly. So yeah, it's happening, but what we just keep getting distressed about is hearing the feedback that it's not recognized often enough by doctors. And so it's all about equitable access, right? I don't want to discredit any doctors who are, seeing this and hearing and listening to patients, but it's not across the board, sadly.
Yeah, I've heard cases of a young healthy man who his nodes went up and stuff, and the doctors he went to wouldn't link it to the vaccine booster. He just said he was fine for the first two. There was a reaction to the boost, but he wouldn't. But look, let's get on to some of these people who have been sending us questions, because that's what we were inviting people to do for the evening.
Yeah.
This one I want to ask about as well, because I've got into the phase of life where trying to live somewhat normally, and basically it's wear a mask everywhere or get a rat. So I had someone come into my studio the other day who was doing some work in here, and I said to them, yep, come on in. Do you want to take a rat or do you want to wear a mask? Your choice. And he chose to do a rat, and that was good. And then we just got on with it. The question was asking here, and I'm going to play a little video first, actually, just to quantify this. Positive rat equals infectious, right? I got my information from 7 Sharp. 7 Sharp did a story 7th of March about why people were testing positive when they're negative or negative when they're positive. But they said very clearly in this story, and I'm going to play 60 seconds of it, that when you test positive on a rat, that's when you're infectious. Now, I want to check this for me, because that means if someone walks into my house with symptoms, but they test negative, according to this, and what I want to ask you is they're not infectious. So let's just have a look at a little bit of this first, and then we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Results rely on what level of infection your test was taken at. The key here is to remember that symptomatic doesn't always equal infectious. If you're vaccinated or have pre-existing immunity, symptoms will kick in quickly after exposure. You'll feel unwell, but high levels of the virus won't be overloading your system. If you're unvaccinated and without this immunity, symptoms are slower to show, but the virus grows faster. This is because the vaccine knows to press play on your immune response. So while you'll be symptomatic and reaching for a test earlier, chances are you aren't yet contagious. PCR tests are able to pick up the virus at these lower levels. But rats, rapid antigen tests, which are designed to detect infectious levels of the virus, may remain negative for 1 to 3 days. What matters here is that a positive rat test will kick in at the most crucial time, when you become infectious. You may just need some patience.
So the story then went on, as you can see, talked to Susie Wiles, and so I took that as gospel, and I've sort of been running by that. Like, my kids go back to their mother's place, they do rats before they leave my house, and that means at that moment they're not infectious, they go next door, and that's vice versa. Is that right? Have we got it right? Is that info right? And based around that question again, positive rat equals infectious, right?
And so there are two things with this. One is that beginning phase that you're speaking of here. The other one is at the other end. And so with testing, nothing's perfect, right? So there was, most of that was relatively true, but even the sense of that, but a PCR will pick up your infection, but a rat won't. And it's kind of like, okay, so the point is that if we had a society like you've just described, where you choose that protection level, rat test or masking or hopefully both or whatever, to go somewhere in an unmasked environment, that's great because, you are going to be on the whole catching the person who's raging positive, who's not going to now enter that dangerous arena. Absolutely. But the window, it's not as perfect as it sounds, in the sense that if you have symptoms and you're negative, you should still be cautious of that, because that's the window where it's a bit iffier. Yeah, sure, your immune system has kicked in, so it's the immune symptoms, but you're not 100% not contagious. So the beginning's the hardest part. The part that's causing the most confusion right now, and is going to ongoing, is the you don't need, first of all, you don't need to test at day 7. You're free to go back to whatever to work, to whatever, if you were positive. I believe the ministry's rules or suggestion is you don't need to test. And then worse, I believe that that's now going to shorten to 5. That discussion's happened, right? Has it been officially said that that's okay, or is it under discussion? Not sure. But that is where the danger zone is. So the policy should be, if you are returning to an unmasked environment and you've just had an infection, test to exit. Negative to exit should be a policy, no matter where you're headed. So, and it is categorically listed on our via the ministry information that you don't need to test again. And in fact, it then goes on to say, do not test again for 28 days. And
so what you're saying is you could still be infectious at day 5 or day 7?
Well, worse, for a triple vaccinated person who gets infected, I think that the data shows that day 5 could be your peak viral load.
Oh.
Yeah, fun times, eh?
Well, so I don't care if we get political or not. I mean, I'm more worried about you if we get political from your position in academia, sort of thing. But why the fuck is this happening? Why like you and I had a conversation last week with Jeremy Elwood, and I brought up all the data about schools in the southern DHB and how for most of the last month we have been 3 times the number of daily cases that we should have been to go to that, what they've talked about, the plateau period. So I was rallying against masks in school, full stop. I see today, not that we need to talk necessarily about this, but that today there are 2 major schools in Auckland, Takapuna, Grammar Point, Chevalier, going back to making masks compulsory. Where is this information for the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education coming from, if what you're saying is they could be putting people who are at their infectious peak back into a, I don't know, let's say cubicle, air-conditioned workspace? Where is that coming from, and why? I guess you can't answer why are they doing it, but where is it coming from?
Well, isn't it obvious that it is politics now? That's how we see it. There's no scientists that are saying that this is scientifically driven, and that's what you'll see on some of the social media saying, can you please tell us where you're getting the advice for these rules? I mean, because we watched all of this happen overseas, right? So like the CDC had a 5-day rule, and the scientists there were like, to be clear that this is not correct, and now we're about to roll it out. So I don't think anyone's under any I don't think anyone actually believes that there's sort of a bunch of scientists informing the government or the ministry to make these decisions. I think it's more that there isn't any, right? Well, I mean, that's an assumption. I don't know, but the assumption is that the information that's coming out is not very accurate, and that's alarming because we spent such a long time following such great advice and everyone adhering to that. So therefore, it's natural for people to keep listening to that advice, and it's dangerous. It is so dangerous because no one is the same, and it just seems ridiculous. Something as simple as, if you're infectious and you are going back to a workplace unmasked to put other people at risk, would you do that? Would you do that knowingly? And you probably wouldn't do it knowingly, But if you heard the information came from ministry, then you wouldn't second guess it, would you? If you didn't think you needed to, why would you think you needed to look it up yourself? But so that's what the danger is, right? Because even very early on, when we were entering back to work, and like my we had cases in our workplace, and my colleague was like, "Oh, Anna, I'm negative. Sorry, I'm still positive today. It's day 7. Should I go back to work?" And I said, "Oh, look, I'd prefer you didn't." I mean, even though we went to work in masks, I sort of said, "Why don't you come back when you're negative?" And she said, "Absolutely, I'll do that." And a lot of people who understand this will do that, but it is categorically written down. You do not need to test on day 7, and you do not need to test again for 28 days.
Is it just on that as well? Can't you test positive for like up to 90 days after you have actually become clear? So won't there be some cases, if we follow that, and I'm not suggesting we don't follow what you're saying, but if we do follow that, there will be some people who are testing positive when they could be going back to work if we wait for a negative test?
There's a tricky zone in here, and I think long COVID comes into this.
Okay.
Like there was a big difference between PCR testing and rats. So PCR tests, that you can pick that up for ages. And before we had vaccinations, that stuff was easy because PCRs would be detected, you'd get an antibody test. Okay, your infection was historical, carry on. So, PCRs are so sensitive that you can pick up residual bits, of the RNA up your nostril many months later.
Okay.
Rats are a bit different. There's still an element of being able to detect, let's say, dead viral particles that are still harbored up your nostrils. But you're more likely to be someone who's got symptoms and symptomatic long COVID-y. And so it's that type of symptoms where the grey area sets in. So I get that. Like, as in, if you have long COVID-like symptoms where you're completely fatigued, you're not recovering, you probably aren't infectious, but you still could test positive for a bit longer than you normally would. So I guess that part makes it difficult.
Yeah.
And in some ways sort of indicates that might be part of the role or part of the the triggers of long COVID, that you haven't cleared away the entire infection. And if there's antigen, because that's what it is, it's an antigen test. It means the virus is there. If it's kicking off your immune system, you're going to feel rubbish. Mm-hmm. So I understand that, it could be confusing if we're all doing this, but if you are symptomatic and, or at least if you have any form of symptoms and you're testing positive, in that 7 to 10 days, track that. And if you're still testing positive, then sort of reevaluate, we shouldn't be sort of too hard and fast on that part.
Yep.
But for most people, that's not going to happen. So for most people, they'll literally have an infectious period, positive, negative, on your way. Like literally for most people, that's going to happen. So is it a huge ask to have a system where when you're raging positive, that you confirm you're negative before you return to your unmasked, unsafe environment? Like, and that should be what our rule is, test to exit. So, test on day 7 because you can go back to work. Oh crap, I'm not negative yet. I'll wait another day. Because what people do when you do that is you see it starts to fade out. It gets weaker. It shows you that you're about to end. And so, the short of it is that those ministry snapshots of the advice about positivity is blurred, and we feel it is dangerous information because it's not quite clear. It's just not clear.
And the other thing about the schools that we're talking about, as we go to our next question, is the principals at the 2 schools that my kids go to are like, well, we're not the experts, we're following the ministry. But as we talked about last week, the ministry is not following the epidemiologists and the health professionals because they're saying different things. So my desire, if your principals are out there or teachers out there, in fact, when we talked last time, I tagged it and I said, share this with a teacher, is that don't follow the ministry necessarily, follow the epidemiologists. If I was going to fix my car, I'd be wanting to ask the mechanic how to do it, not the manager of the store who doesn't have any mechanical experience. I want to know from the mechanic what was wrong with my car.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to that point, like we as a group of experts, formulated a letter to say this is what, a bunch of scientists and doctors believe the situation is, as a way for people to approach their schools, or for principals themselves to sort of go, okay, this is what the experts are sort of saying. In the event, in the situation where we were all feeling it was a bit unsafe, like we were never keen on the idea that schools made up their own decision, because that's just not working. It's great if you're a school that's doing it great. Awesome.
And the irony is, of course, the political game that's now being played by the government is going to backfire, because COVID, I read in America today, they're looking at 500,000 cases a day again, because it's become political and we're not following the health and the scientists, the health experts. Numbers are going to potentially go up again, and then they're going to get the backlash from that on election day because they didn't take care of COVID. So it's actually, if there's a no-win situation, you either look like a dick now and a controlling freak now, but we get rid of COVID, or you look like a dick in 6 months' time because you haven't got rid of COVID. Well, what about for the sake of the citizens, we take the former rather than the latter? Because at least then we'll have gotten rid of COVID as much as we can. As much as we can. We're not going to get rid of it, but you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And we all know that elimination is close to impossible, right? But mitigation, and let's not forget what the idea of mitigation is. The idea is to protect our vulnerable. Why should we be locking up every person who's vulnerable while every able person goes about their lives because they don't care if they get infected? Like, that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about the privilege, the difference between going and hitting a nightclub with everyone who wants to go and risk that's fine, versus going to work and going to school. Those things are what we have to do every day.
Yep.
So therefore, we just want it to be safe for all of our community, everyone who's vulnerable, to feel like that they're allowed to walk the planet. What's happening now is that you're a freak, you're an overreactor. Chris Hipkins even labelled the terminology behind this as catastrophizing. So all of those, that we were catastrophizing by saying that we think that children should be protected. That's catastrophizing.
Well, schools in Auckland are going back to mask mandates. I think that says it all.
Yeah.
Hey, let's look at this one. I think the question's not, no offense to Alex, I don't think the question's quite right, because it says, what's the current understanding of how long COVID remains in the air and indoor? I just think it means COVID. When it first came out, there was all those diagrams on One News and News Hub about the things floating over the aisles at the supermarket, and I've wondered this as well, because when COVID came into my house through a border, we understood that it hangs in the air for about 30 minutes, so we were kind of avoiding spaces for 30 minutes. But is there a number that we can put to for like COVID hanging in the air in an indoor area? I.e., how soon can you enter an indoor space maskless after someone else has been in there that has COVID? And if you're watching us and if you're watching on Twitter, as you can see, hashtag Ask Dr. Anna. And I'll be honest with you, we probably have too many questions already unless Anna wants to stay here till 2 a.m. But we will try and get to your questions. Or if we can't get to your question, we'll try and cover your question, because probably 3 other people are asking it as well.
I'll do quick fire. Yeah. I'll quick fire this one. And I'm no aerosol scientist. I'm no expert in knowing how long these things last in the air. But what I will say is that I think the general number that you see floating around, if you pardon the pun, is 3 hours it can stay in the air. But that's probably a controlled environment, right? So humidity, ventilation, all of those things come into play. So it must, the 3 hours in the air is probably stale air that doesn't move.
Right.
So that's why we're promoting ventilation, and all the rest of it. Ventilation, filtration, all of those things to clean the air. But I believe that aerosolization, that this virus can hang out in an airspace for 3 hours.
So 3 hours should be the yardstick for, if you want. I mean, obviously there's no guarantees, but that sounds like what you're saying is that's the
I think the standard statement is 3 hours, but that. Yep. It's very difficult. If you're well ventilated, then that's going to be completely different, and humidity and all the rest of it. Yeah.
All right. Here's a question from YouTube. So if you want to watch us on YouTube, you can also just enter in the comments a question, and we'll do our best to get to it. Has the biotech/Pfizer vaccine been modified for the Omicron or its variants?
I believe it was, and they were all set to release, an Omicron in early. I can't remember probably the early one, and then it mutated. So I don't think it's been very protective against its subvariants. So all good and well, but probably not going to do much good in the long run. But that's essentially where they were headed.
Here's another one for you. I don't know if this is sort of a backwards way of asking the question, but it says, I guess it's there are doctors, real ones, questioning higher rates of long COVID in countries that don't aspirate. Sounds like this person's been listening to Joe Rogan. They don't aspirate when injecting versus countries that do.
Oh,
Any
good Lord.
thoughts? Can you first of all explain aspiration with the blood and the needle, and then people will know what the question means?
That's meaning this thing, as you say, that was going viral, if you pardon the pun, about vaccinations. When you stab in, and supposedly you're supposed to aspirate to check that you haven't hit a blood vessel before you shove in. So where that then escalated was that there was people surmising that was the correlation to the link to myocarditis happening from vaccinations. I think that sort of link was a giant stretch, because even when myocarditis was happening, it was in particular demographics, I think males even, and all the rest of it. So in the other giant stretch that happens from this correlation with long COVID, whenever we talk about long COVID, you tend to there's people sometimes fly in this big barrage, sort of saying the vaccine causes long COVID. No, it does not. Like the biggest, most severe people, that I know that I've been working with for 2 years, there was no vaccine when they got long COVID. What people are conflating here, and I will say this, is that the rare proportion of adverse reactions, some of those symptoms can mimic what people see with long COVID. And what that's just telling us is that our bodies are reacting to the spike protein, whether it's the vaccine or the virus, and some of us just have a crap time with that. Heaps more have a crap time with that and end up with long COVID. Heaps more, right? That, like, this virus is just going rampant through your body. And that's where that confusion comes from, that people think the vaccine caused long COVID. And no, that is not the link at all.
I put a bit of a tongue-in-cheek comment on my Facebook page today, Anna. It may surprise you, and I said, "Come join us tonight. Like, if your uncle's been putting things on Facebook from Counterspin Media, you might want to tell him that we're having this conversation tonight." And it looks like someone has. Oh, look, and I'm not doing this to be disrespectful, but I know I won't put the post up because I don't want this person to get any kind of flack if that is their belief. I don't want anything, but they just make the statement: be smarter, avoid the toxic and ineffective vaccine. At the start of, well, the question I want to ask is the ineffective bit. Certainly at the start of Omicron coming out, we were finding out that 90% of people in hospital were coming from the 5% unvaccinated society. They were also, it seems that a lot of the, if I can coin the phrase, anti-vaxxers out there are pointing out like more people in hospital are vaccinated than not, and that's like because 95% of the population is vaccinated. Yeah, because I can't do maths. Yeah. Is this? I haven't seen a lot of data recently on this though. Certainly back in, I mean, this is probably there's a date. Oh, this is towards the end of last year anyway. But are we still looking at disproportionate number of unvaccinated people getting the worst of Omicron? Is that still the current data?
I don't know whether they're, like our vaccination rates are so high, it will be hard to draw conclusions. Because those types of strange conclusions get drawn, like, look, all the people who are getting this severely are vaccinated, and you're like, wow, you don't understand maths if you think that that's how that works. Like when most of the population are vaccinated, you're still going to get severe. There was never a promise that the vaccination is going to protect every single age group with every single vulnerability against severe impacts and death. Yep. No one has ever said that, because our immune systems are so different. Like we don't know who walking amongst us, who's the marathon trainer who suddenly gets their butt kicked and is hospitalized and is completely sick despite being triple vaccinated. And we don't also know, that the person who's never had a vaccine and gets it mildly. All of those things happen. And so the short answer is I don't know whether there's enough unvaccinated and getting, you know, widespread prevalence, that to sort of see what that data is. Like, I think, you know,
Because
countries like America
they were tracking it at one stage. I mean, this is from
Yeah.
a couple of months ago again. You know, the hospitalizations at that point, remember, if 5% of the population are unvaccinated, to have 14 or to say 15% in hospital, then that's a disproportionate representation of the unvaxxed. And also, if 90 or something like 90 or 80% were boosted by that point, only 24% of people with. So it seemed to be that way. I was just wondering, well, if there was any other analysis or any is that trend stayed now? Did you know that at all? That was what I was wondering.
No,
to try and help out our messenger understand that the vaccine does actually works to protect us from the most serious most of the time.
Yeah, and one of the other messages with boosting, like we really saw that, you know, early on when Omicron hit here, because we hadn't, you know, completed our boosting regime, and it was really showing that, you know, your hospitalization risk was much higher with just two doses.
Mm-hmm.
And as the data comes out, what the data then shows us, it's not like just sort of this repeat. It's not like taking another dose of a medicine. When you're getting repeat vaccinations, it's rounds of training. You're training your immune system. So the first time is like, oh yeah, okay, I'll do better next time. The next time is like, oh, okay, and it really ramps up. I'm like, I've now a trained fighter. I'm gonna kick this butt. And then that wasn't quite good enough because the virus mutated. So when we did the booster, again, that sort of kicked us back higher up, and it's continually training the immune system. And so it's making our antibodies a little bit better, because these antibodies, the ones that we want to shut down the virus faster, stick to the outside of the virus to prevent it infecting your cells. And with Omicron, it doesn't stick very well because Spike mutated. Right. They still work okay-ish, not great, but our other line of defense kicks in and helps us shut it down, which is where this mild categorization came from, because we do have our second line of defense that helps shut it down. But even with the fourth dose, you know, like where countries are rolling that out too, it's retraining each time just so that they're a little bit better to shut the virus down. So it's got nothing to do with it being ineffective. The virus is evading it. Like that's, you know, it's doing that, but it's not completely evading it, because we know that, because a study came out that categorically said Omicron is no milder than original variants. It's just off the back of immune priming, which means either constant exposure or vaccination.
Yeah, so that means if you are unvaccinated, it's as serious as the original. Yeah, and I haven't heard that message anywhere. If you heard that message somewhere, if there are still, if the vaccine hesitance still exists, maybe that should be the message that's been coming from the top. Not you can go out back to work after 5 days. Hey, I want to say to people as well, we talked about talking till 11 o'clock, and I know you said you're a night owl, but we won't go too much after 11 in general. So if you've got a question, you need to get it in now. If you're on Twitter, hashtag Ask Dr. Anna. If you're watching in YouTube, look, I haven't even looked at Facebook, to be honest. If you're watching on Facebook, I'm sorry. If you've asked a question there, I probably haven't even seen it. But if you're watching on YouTube, just in the comments. Here's one that's a bit more of a clinical one from Greg. Greg says, any guidance appreciated on what an initial long COVID assessment and tests should look like? There's no guidelines for patients or doctors in New Zealand.
Yeah, this is what's really difficult, right? I think the first critical point when you know that you're having these lingering symptoms, you know, that you haven't recovered, is to get everything checked out to see that there's nothing serious going on, because we know that this virus can cause serious conditions. So you generally go to your doctor, and they should be doing sort of standard things like just you're having a look at all your boring old blood counts and things like that. So they just will do a whole bunch of tests. But the key things are checking that you don't have any heart problems, lung, and all the rest of it. But you need to be prepared, and I guess this is the key thing, is that most of those clinical tests will come back normal. But it doesn't mean that there's nothing wrong. It's just that we don't have the tests yet to identify that you've got long COVID. That's what my research project is aiming to do. We're hoping to, you know, find a diagnostic to say, you feel rubbish and here's the reason why. So yeah, absolutely, it is going to be difficult for both doctors and patients through this period, because there's no real sort of standard, standard set of treatments to do this, standard set of tests. Yeah, so it's rough. Yeah.
All right, let's go to Twitter, one that came in a little bit earlier that asks this question: how effective are standard surgical masks against COVID when worn properly? Cloth aren't good, N95 are great, with surgical in between, but can you put a percentage on it? And is there a good study you can point me towards that simulates a real world setting? Well, if you've got any opinions on that, I'll quickly Google to see if there's a study as well, so we can do it
Go
two
on.
ways.
Yeah,
All right.
because I would say that the main thing with surgical masks are that they are so difficult to get well fitted. I when I wear one, I tie it in a knot, and I tie it in a knot so it sits on my face. You barely ever see someone that has a perfectly fitted surgical mask. I think the key thing with surgical masks are in a setting where everyone is masked and there's surgicals. I think that is way, way, way better than zero masking. But if you're in a setting like healthcare, or even if you're in a work situation where like what we've just described, if you're critical workers, essential workers, where you're getting these new rules like return to work after 5 days, and you're probably raging positive, or even 7 days, and in those scenarios, if everyone's masking, it's going to protect everyone. But in those scenarios where you're going to potentially be at work with an infection, you absolutely have to be, or should be, in an N95. Do you know what I'm quite shocked about? Here's one of my shocking pieces of information that just baffles me. Like, I laugh about this, and I said you can tell a quality. No, I shouldn't say quality. You can tell how much a medical doctor takes COVID seriously by what they're wearing on their face.
Yeah. Wow.
That's what it tells me now, and that's not standard across our country. Absolutely, fine. If you're in a COVID ward, you need to be in an N95. But I kind of laugh and say, you go compare a standard, a hospital, I don't know, pick one, to my scientist lab, and which one would you expect everyone to be wearing 95s in, and which one is wearing 95s in? And it's probably not what you would think.
Really?
So my lab, we're all in N95s, low
Yeah.
risk, and the hospitals are not.
Wow.
But some are, because some people would say, oh yeah, all the staff here are wearing N95s, but it's not across the board. And it shouldn't be to do with risk. You're around sick people, and so that I think says a lot when N95s are not even a standard requirement in our hospitals. It sends the message that surgical's fine. And if I was to say surgical's fine because if it's well fitted and you don't have gaping holes out the sides, fine. But no, I don't think there would be any study with percents on it. And you might have might have.
I just basically found the something on cbsnews.com, which is more generic. It talks about what the CDC does, but it basically says exactly what the person asked the question. In terms of effectiveness in preventing the spread of COVID, the CDC put surgical masks on the same level as KN95S. The agency says both offer more protection than a cloth mask, but less protection than the N95S. Yeah. So that's actually the question was asked, what it does this, and the answer is, yeah, it does that.
But it's silly because, to me, though, that would be based on it being fitting.
Right.
Like, I don't know, when you put one on me, like it's there's a gale force wind that can go for it. It's got gaping holes in it. So I can get a good fit by tying knots in the side and tucking it all in and making it all perfect. I can get a good fit like that, and then I'd probably say that's relatively safe. Most surgical masks you see hanging off people's faces, or not even on their nose, or on their chin. It's quite good to.
God, don't you hate that? That's what South Park calls a chin diaper. That was the phrase they coined. We're in the chin diaper. In fact,
if you're in a high risk area, like there are other indicators to sort of people point out, like don't do that because your neck's been exposed. If you're in a high risk, if you're actually being exposed to COVID and your mask goes here, then you're just going to put it on your own face. Breathe it in.
I read somewhere, some research somewhere that said the people who wear them like this are actually more at risk than not wearing them at all, because how COVID can shed and be more infective primarily in the nose.
Yeah.
And so if you're doing this, you're basically only breathing through your nose, whereas if you're not wearing one at all, you tend to breathe through both. So if people are just wearing it over their mouth with their nose exposed, they are more at risk, and they're putting us more at risk. So just if you're going to wear it around like this, apparently, correct me if I'm wrong, Anna, but the research says just don't wear it at all. It's actually better for everybody if you don't wear it at all rather than wear this.
You look stupid and you're annoying. So, and right, you know, stupid and annoying. Like, what? Why exactly? Why bother? But yeah, like, I think, you know, surgical's better than nothing, and cloth and all the rest of it. But you have to be mindful of all those gaps. The gaps mean that you can breathe in and breathe out, puffing COVID everywhere. So just, you know, be innovative there. Tie them in knots, tuck them in, nip tucks, and then they'll probably be better than nothing. Yeah. Well, no, better than most. Yeah. So close.
I go to my dentist, and I think she wears surgical, and then on top of that wears a N95. So she's really buttoning up.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Well, I mean, imagine being a dentist when you're literally, you know, someone's puffing out all their germs to you. Yeah. Yeah. So, but it's incredible. You know, here we are. We're in the society where it's now, you know, you don't have to wear that anymore. You know, that's the new catchphrase. Why are you wearing a mask?
Because
it's not good.
The answer is because if at all possible, I'm going to do what I can not to catch COVID. That's my answer if someone was to say that to me. I don't get many people saying that to me. I'm 6'4" and I can be. And when I do this, like when I've got the dog out,
no one's going to question you.
I don't get many people questioning me on my mask usage. Here's a question from SP, and it's one that I kind of want to ask as well. So I have a background to kind of vaccines a little bit. My old man was in the 1948 polio epidemic. So, you know, vaccines against polio and that kind of stuff are quite important part of my life and part of my upbringing. And I've seen someone grow up with a debilitating condition based on a pandemic. And will vaccines be better soon, says SP. Will we see that better vaccine soon? Sorry. Is there any chance that this is going to be there's your 10-year vaccine, you know, like some of these other pandemics we had, like polio? Or is this going to be like we're told a little bit, make it clear it's not the flu, but like how the flu needs an update every year because it mutates?
Yeah. Well, it's hard to know, because when you see humanity doing what it is now, where everyone doesn't care, even though this thing's dangerous, you know, where's the appetite for more vaccinations? You know what I mean? Like, as in, would people take on a new vaccine? So the short answer is that we should not be stopping giving, you know, we should not give up on trying to get a better vaccine for this virus, because the biggest problem is the immunity is not lasting. And are we going to outrun it, or is it going to stay with us for, you know, like, and keep being so damn bad? So one of the perspectives, or one of the vaccine areas is mucosal immunity. So, you know, this thing gets up our nostrils, right? So there are types of vaccines, you know, up your nose. In fact, I watched Contagion during lockdown, sitting there in shock going, who made this movie? Because they made this pandemic, because this movie is exactly what we're going through. Like, I was sitting there literally in shock, just going, why am I watching this? And oh my goodness, this is exactly what's happening in our world. And I laughed because they said, oh my God, a vaccine is going to take 3 weeks to get to roll out. And you're like, 3 weeks, you know, woo. You know, and they had the scientists who stabbed themselves in the leg, and yes, it worked, and tested. Point being, in that Contagion movie that was completely real, you know, they had a squirt up the nostril vaccine. And that is being trialed, because what we want is what they call sterilizing immunity. So, you know, it's like having little, you know, gatekeepers in your nostrils that just kick the virus out as soon as it enters. So if you have fast acting immunity up your nostril passages, then that's going to sterilize. And some of our vaccines do that. Why these coronaviruses don't have lasting immunity is a pain in the butt. But the short of it is I'm sure that there's going to be vaccines behind the scenes to sort of, you know, get any coronavirus that ever comes along. whether there's appetite for that or whether the world is just accepted, and we see this in our own society, like, man, let's move on, just get it and move on. They don't even hear the fact that this is going to continually kick our butts over and over and over again.
I guess it's a bit like a lot of people don't. Like, I've never had a flu vaccine. I'm getting one this year.
Neither.
But I've never had one. So I guess that kind of speaks to what you're talking about, but just getting used to it. I wanted to show you something as well as we wrap up. You're talking about contagion. There's been a reboot of Planet of the Apes. Like, I think it was like 2011, 2014, 2017, 3 Planet of the Apes. And it's sort of set before the 1968 one, kind of showing how it all happens. No spoilers. But this is how the first one ends, talking about what's watching that. What you're seeing is the floor of an airport with a pilot who's been infected with the virus that the apes are going to get. And I'm putting it on double speed just to get through this bit quickly. But this is the end of the first Planet of the Apes reboot, the one from 2011. Check this out. There's the plane, right? There's the pilot on the plane, flying from America. Oh, and he's landing, and there's the UK, Europe. And when he lands in Europe, oh, look at that. And then he flies into Africa, I think, or Europe. Oh, and he does that. And I was watching this 2 weeks ago going, oh, crap. Art imitating life or life imitating art? Which one's it going to be? So
it's creepy, eh?
It's really creepy watching that. It was quite freaky to actually watch it.
I literally couldn't believe how, like, poised on the edge of my seat when I watched Contagion. I mean, it was ridiculous that it had taken me that long to watch it, but I was like, because it ends with you know the whole bat. You know, it just blew my mind how much it imitated life. Yeah, it was incredible.
Alrighty. Hey, listen, I'm just going to do a quick reset and just double check there's no more crackers of questions and that have popped in. And I'm going to have a look over here. I mean, there are more questions. Look, I apologize. Several people asked kind of several questions as well. And I'm just, you know, as much as I would love to be basically on a phone call with one person, this is not what this is. So I'm not going to go, And there's another comment, watch 12 Monkeys. It's true. I haven't watched that for a very long time. So be interesting to watch that again as well.
That's a good one to reboot and have.
And Brad Pitt is a gorgeous man. We have to admit that. So it's well worth watching. No, you're not your style? No, fair enough. Okay. I think we'll leave it there, Anna. I think this has been a success. I think we have gotten out some information. I think that, there's plenty of questions. I didn't get to all of the questions, but that was never going to happen. And I don't know. I'm wondering what we can leave people with. Because one of the things I am aware of when I talk about this on this little up in that corner, the big hairy news thing up there, is I get to the end of some of these conversations or shows and I go, man, I hope we haven't just freaked everybody out. And like the thing I don't want to also do is, should there be someone watching or listening or whatever now who gets COVID on Wednesday, I don't want them to go, oh, what did they say on Friday? Oh my God, I'm going to get long COVID. The world is over. You know, it's like I don't want to put out there a huge amount of fear for people. Yeah, but equally, I don't want to do what the Ministry of Education's doing and going, oh, you know, no masks are needed. It's not a big deal. So is there a way we can finish with some kind of realistic outlook without sowing seeds of fear and fear alone, to give people accurate information as to what they can do and should do? And I'll say it this way, being generous to people who don't, should they want to keep themselves as safe as they can from COVID?
Absolutely. And that's always been my mantra, especially, you know, like we know that the virus is out there. Scaremongering's never the point here. It's awareness raising. You know, it's the people that we hear that sort of say things like, I never knew that this could happen. So as long as we can say, look, you know, these are possibilities. Try and protect yourself. Of course, it's not going to be perfect for everyone. And if you do get infected, again, don't panic. Rest through it all. You know, like just take all that advice and you know, and do what you can. It's just that raising awareness and just trying to not get infected and taking it easy if you do, because it's the stories we read and they are happening a lot, mostly internationally, because let's give our media credit as well, in the sense that they like to tell our stories. They like to make sure voices are heard. Some countries completely didn't talk about long COVID. I mean, it doesn't mean that everyone knows that long COVID exists, but it's that heartbreaking thing when someone will say, I had no idea that this could happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that so that kind of stands here, that we're not hearing much about reinfections happening. We're not hearing that long COVID is still a possibility. If you could get your infection, woohoo, I'm now going to party hard. You might get another infection and you might not do so better the next time. All of those things are bits of information that you can choose your own risk. Choose your own risk while not forgetting that it's the vulnerable people around you that can't have that, that don't have the privilege to choose. They have to choose their environment. You might be able to do everything and anything you want. A vulnerable person can't. So please respect other people in environments where they can't protect. They have to mask. And I think I read a message that I really liked, where you should be say, see someone in a mask and pop a mask on, and not sort of say, do you want me to wear a mask?
Right.
Because you're putting it back on them. So that was a nice message as well, when someone's wearing a mask, and to not necessarily say, do you want me to wear one too? Just do it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a caring thing. I realise, as you're saying, one thing we haven't really talked about is reinfection rates, because no one's talking about it. But you just brought it up then, and I'll say to you, look, I'm not giving the advice because you're the medical expert, but the idea that we're getting messages from people, actually even in the show, people who are watching tonight, I know, because I know one of the people has messaged us about their child brought COVID home, they got COVID, 6 weeks later they've got COVID, and their child's showing signs of it.
Yep.
So that idea of, at the start, we were talking about death rate, and that was one of the reasons people thought it was so mild. We weren't talking about long COVID, meaning those stats weren't being used. And now we're talking about maybe some more long COVID and maybe death rate, but we're not talking about reinfection. And that's something that I think. So I see the Highlanders game, and I see, 90 days ago when the first wave of COVID went through Dunedin and all the students got infected. And then I see last Friday night's game down at the stadium, all of the students in the zoo, which is our stand where we watch the students watch, not a single mask to be seen. So all of those students are now, let's just say all of them have been infected. All of those students are now up for reinfection again. And that's the cycle that's going to keep this going on. It's going to keep all those people hating what's happening. Yeah,
exactly. So your reinfections is really critical message to get out there. That and I don't think, it doesn't sound like we're going to have a decent way of tracking that. I think there's already been intel to say, you might be able to report that if it's through your GP, and you jump through hoops and prove it, all sorts of jazz. So a lot of this is empowering people to take their health into their own hands, and just be aware of all of these things. It sucks. We liked the ministry leading the charge. And so now it's all a bit blurred, and because it's moving to this live with the virus scenario, that comes with mixed messages, that live with sounds like it's safe to live with it, and it is not safe to live with the virus. It is assessing your own risk.
I did a podcast this afternoon, which I'll be uploading on about Tuesday, with Tom Much, who's a war correspondent who's currently in Ukraine. Living with a virus is like saying he's currently living with a war. It doesn't mean that doesn't mean it's okay. I mean, he's driving past exploded buildings up all the time, but he's living with the war at the moment. Just because you're living with something doesn't mean it's necessarily good. So I think that's a good thing to perhaps leave on. Other than to say, is your cat still there?
I don't know where he went.
Because I'll show you. Nala, come here. Hey, come here.
He just,
I've got a dog version. I've got a dog version of your cat. Nala, come here.
Yeah.
Come here. Totally. You look at the colouring.
How can you have a dog version of a cat?
Well, I'll show you. Come here. I've got another camera up there. It's not on. I've got the dog cam on. I'll show you. Come here.
You got a dog cam. I like that.
Look, see? Look, it's the same colouring. I've got a dog version of your cat. Look, there you go. Cheers.
Hello.
I've got a dog version of your cat. Same colour.
Oh, bless.
Back to you,
my cat does this thing where as soon as there's, a Zoom, he knows there's a Zoom happening and will come across the screen. I mean, I don't know where he is now. It's quite strange. You're lucky. Sometimes he used to bring in a bird at the same time, to show off.
Perfect. Avian flu. Is that we could start talking about
Yeah.
that shortly? No, my dog's got a little bed down there, and she just comes down of her own volition, and we hang out in the studio together. It's my studio.
Oh,
dog.
bless.
Hey, Anna, this has been great. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
I hope this will be passed around by people. Lots of people, as I was putting them up as you were talking, saying, thank you for the information, thank you for the clear information. I thank you as well for coming back on, hanging out on a Friday night, and gosh, I'm sure we'll talk again at some stage. But this has been brilliant, and I'll pass on my thanks to you from the people who are saying thanks to us. And other than that, everybody, look, for people who are watching, I think we're probably back at 10 o'clock on Monday night. George has been off this week sick. He's a university tutor. Guess what? But he says he'll probably be back on Monday. We haven't actually talked about this, so we'll probably do 10 p.m. because he missed this whole week of 10 p.m. So I'm sure he'll want to give it a go as well. So let's just commit to it. 10 p.m. Monday night. Next week we'll be back again. Until then, I will catch you. Have a great weekend. Anna, thank you again, and we will talk sometime soon. All right, here everybody. We'll see you next time.